Imagine a land where the fields lie lower than the sea beyond them. There, water does not merely surround people. At times, it stands higher than where they live. A significant part of this country's territory lies below natural sea level. Even its major airport sits on land that was once a drained lake. In some places, the ground lies nearly 7 meters below the surface of the sea. By ordinary logic, land like this should belong to water. The cities, railways, and fields here seem to stand in the wrong natural place. If the pumps stopped, rainwater and groundwater would begin to gather. The small ditches would fill first, then the larger canals would rise slowly but steadily. Some low areas would not disappear at once, but they would gradually lose their ability to be lived in. And yet, on that land, houses still light up every evening. Trains run, bicycles roll, farms operate, as if the sea level had never been there. The water is still there, but it is measured, divided, guided, and pumped away every day. That place is the Netherlands, a country living in a long confrontation with sea, rivers, and rain. Its story is a centuries-long struggle between controlling water and learning to live with it. The origin of the paradox begins in a low delta, where rivers meet the sea. Sediment, peat, mud, and tides created soft, wet land that could easily change shape. Before large dikes existed, many areas were only a fragile edge between land and salt water. The Rhine, Maas, and Scheldt carry water from Europe down into this coastal region. So the Netherlands does not fear only the sea. It must also calculate water from inland. Low land attracted people because it was flat, fertile, and close to water trade routes. But that attraction came with one condition. Homes always had to stand higher than water. The first artificial mounds were like small islands in a sea of wet grass. People could not yet defeat the water. They only tried to stand above it. Every tide season and every storm reminded them that the country's border was never fixed. When the water retreated, it left behind mud, fish, salt, and a new problem. To farm for the long term, people had to keep water out of fields for more than one season. To build villages, they had to turn temporary ground into something predictable. That was the beginning of a special way of thinking. Land was not simply there, it was held in place. In that soft land, draining water also caused the ground to slowly sink. The more people dried the land to live on it, the more carefully many places needed protection from water. So the Netherlands was not born as a fortress. It grew like an agreement with water. Each village had to understand the water around it, or every effort could be erased. No one could protect only their own land if a neighbor allowed water to pass through. From then on, flood protection was no longer an individual task, but a community instinct. The first adaptation was simple: pile up earth, build a bank, and wait for the water to retreat. The earliest small dikes were not grand structures, but survival edges. When the tide fell, wooden sluices were opened so water in the fields could drain out. When the tide rose, the sluices closed, turning the dike into a giant valve. The idea was small but decisive, not to block water forever, but to choose when to open. From one earth bank, the Dutch gradually created the first upside-down boat. Inside that boat were fields, villages, livestock, and lives that needed to stay dry. Outside was water, waiting for a weak gap, a strong wind, or a mistake. So dikes were not only built, they were watched, patched, and raised. One generation built the banks, and the next learned how to read cracks in them. When the land inside the dikes remained too wet, they needed power to lift water out. Human and animal strength helped only partly, because water returned without tiring. Then wind became an ally, turning blades to pull water out of low land. Windmills did not only grind grain, many were once the hearts of drainage. Each rotation moved a small amount of water, but day after day, it made a difference. In low places, survival did not come from one wall, but from repetition. The dike had to hold, the sluice had to open at the right time, and the machine had to turn when the land was too wet. Gradually, people no longer merely avoided water. They began to control its schedule. The strange thing is that the more artificial the land became, the more normal life inside it looked. But for that normality to last, scattered solutions had to become a system. Systemization began when water was treated as a shared responsibility, not a private disaster. Communities had to contribute labor, money, and accept common rules for dikes. From this grew water management organizations, guarding the invisible part of the country. A dike was no longer the edge of a field. but infrastructure protecting many villages. A sluice no longer served one farm, but affected the entire low basin behind it. The polder emerged as a piece of land enclosed, then kept dry through discipline. Inside a polder, water was not free to go wherever it wanted as in nature. It was collected into small ditches, guided into larger canals, then sent to the pumping point. Each area had a desired water level, depending on soil, houses, roads, and crops. So the water map of the Netherlands was not just rivers and lakes, but management compartments. In that system, dikes were like the sides of a ship, and polders were the compartments inside. If one compartment failed, the rest had to have a chance to keep floating. That is why the system has not just one line of dikes, but many layers of defense. At the coast are dikes and dunes. Inland are canals, sluices, and pumps. At river mouths, sluice gates decide when water is allowed to pass. In urban areas, drainage must account for heavy rain and hard pavement. In rural areas, water must be low enough for roots, but not so low that the soil dries out. Water management, therefore, becomes a form of managing time, space, and risk. When the sea is calm, the system still works. When the sun is shining, water is still monitored. Safety does not lie in the emergency moment, but in repeated maintenance. A small deviation in a valve, sensor, or canal bank can spread into a larger problem. So the Netherlands operates like a giant flood control machine spread beneath the open sky. That machine is not loud. It hides in straight canals, grassy banks, and small pumping stations. Viewers often see peaceful scenery, but beneath it lies a strict operating schedule. To understand why it does not sink, one must look at the water being guided. The central mechanism begins with gravity. Water always wants to find a lower place. Inside a polder, that lower place is not the sea, but designed drainage ditches. Rain falls on roofs, streets, and grass fields, then is pulled into the drainage network. Small flows connect to larger flows, like capillaries connecting to veins. But because the land inside is low, water often cannot flow to the sea by itself. This is when pumping stations do the unnatural work, lifting water higher. A pump does not make land dry once. It maintains dryness continuously. If the canal water level rises, sensors and operators must respond in time. If the water level falls too low, peat soil can dry, compress, and sink further. So water control is not simply pumping as much as possible. It is like adjusting breathing, removing excess water without draining life away. Sea dikes handle a different force, not collecting water, but resisting waves and tides. Waves do not need to break the entire dike. They only need to erode one weak point long enough. So the outer face of a dike is often reinforced to dissipate energy before water climbs up. The inner face must remain stable, because overtopping water can erode it from behind. Sluices and storm surge barriers work like giant eyelids before a violent sea. When a storm arrives, gates can close to cut off seawater from pushing deep inland. But closing gates for too long also affects boats, ecosystems, and freshwater flow. So every opening and closing decision is a balance between safety and daily life. The Dutch water system does not only ask where water is, but where it should go. When rivers rise, water may need temporary space instead of being forced into a narrow channel. A controlled floodplain can reduce pressure on the main dike. This is a mechanism that is hard to see. Sometimes safety comes from empty space. The more houses are built close to a river, the less room water has to deviate safely. So water management is also management of where people may place their homes. Weather data, water levels, wind, and tides help the system look a few steps ahead. Forecasting cannot stop a storm, but it helps gates close before water reaches its peak. At smaller scales, sensors help pumps act before water has already caused damage. Even so, data only matters when people understand the landscape behind it. A water level number in a city means something very different from the same number in a meadow. Water in a city threatens tunnels, power lines, and transport much faster. Water on a meadow can be a risk, but sometimes it is also a buffer. From above, the Netherlands looks like a wet circuit board where every canal has a function. But unlike a circuit board, it has mud, plants, fish, residents, and daily habits. So engineering here cannot be separated from daily life, agriculture, and nature. A higher dike may protect against the sea, but it also changes wind, landscape, and access routes. A wider canal may drain floods, but it takes land from farms or neighborhoods. Every physical solution, therefore, carries a social decision behind it. The Netherlands survives not because of one secret, but because thousands of small decisions fit together. And that very fit also creates the hidden cost of a low country. The first cost is dependence. Dry land needs energy to remain dry. When pumps, valves, and sensors become routine, calmness is easily mistaken for nature. But that natural appearance must be paid for with maintenance, budgets, and long shifts. The longer a dike is, the more points must be inspected, from surface grass to the soil core. An animal burrow, a rotten root, or a weak patch of grass can all be worth attention. The more tightly people control water, the more they must remember that the system still has limits. Climate change shifts those limits through heavier rainfall and higher sea levels. What was once a wide safety margin can become a distance that must be recalculated. Urban growth also makes the consequences larger if a protected area fails. A flooded field is damage. A flooded city is a break in the lifeline. Many people living behind dikes may forget that their safety lies just beyond sight. Familiarity makes water look gentler, even though it still carries the same physical force. A bridge, tunnel, or train station must all be imagined together with the water map. Poor planning may not create a flood immediately, but it can accumulate risk over decades. So the Netherlands must protect both the present and decisions not yet fully built. Another cost is psychological. The more successful the system becomes, the easier it is to take for granted. But a low country is not allowed to remember water only when it causes trouble. It must remember on sunny days, holidays, ordinary days, and in the middle of the night. On this upside-down boat, no moment can be considered completely at rest. Electricity, data, and people become new parts of the wall against water. The smarter a system becomes, the more it needs the old question. What if it does not run? That question belongs not only to engineers, but to everyone living behind the dikes. Because when water exceeds its limits, it does not distinguish between homes, farms, or data centers. The hidden cost, therefore, is not outside the system. It lies in dependence on the system itself. History once reminded the Netherlands of this through a night when water crossed many lines of defense. In early 1953, a North Sea storm and high tide created a brutal test. Wind pushed water toward the coast, while the sea rose just as the dike lines came under heavy pressure. In many places, water did not merely overflow, it gouged, broke, and widened breaches. When a breach appeared, the current became a saw cutting deep into soft earth. Water poured into the polder like into a low bowl, and the more it entered, the harder it was to leave. Many people did not face a single wave, but rising water in the dark. That flood killed more than 1,800 people in the Netherlands. Tens of thousands had to leave their homes, while fields, livestock, and roads sank beneath saltwater. The disaster did not only show that water was powerful, it showed that the old system was not strong enough. Earlier warnings were no longer theory. They appeared as real breaches. When the water retreated, it left a larger question. Was the old way of protection still enough? A nation used to living with water realized that familiarity did not mean safety. That climax turned flood defense from a local reaction into a national mission. From that pain, the idea of the Delta Works entered the center of Dutch engineering imagination. But building huge seaworks is not as simple as pulling a wall across a river mouth. Wide estuaries, deep beds, strong currents, and salt-fresh ecosystems all had to be considered. If the sea is blocked too tightly, danger decreases, but estuary life also changes sharply. So even in the strongest reaction, the question of coexistence did not disappear. The Delta Works became a great answer, but also an admission that water always returns. Giant steel gates do not erase danger. They turn danger into operation. Each time a major storm arrives, the question is not whether to fear, but what to close, what to open, and when. The historical climax, therefore, did not end with construction, but with lasting responsibility. The larger the structure, the harder the maintenance question becomes to push into the background. After 1953, the lesson was not only to build higher, but to think further. From there, the Dutch response shifted from defending separate places to managing the whole system. The reaction after the disaster was to build larger defenses, but not with concrete alone. Hydraulic science, weather forecasting, and safety standards became part of the infrastructure. Instead of waiting for water to arrive, people modeled in advance how it would move. Storms inside laboratories helped real dikes gain larger safety margins. Dike upgrades were not only about height, but also materials and shape. Storm surge gates were designed to close when needed, while allowing estuaries to breathe in normal times. This is a subtle change. Protection does not mean sealing every flow of water. Modern pumping stations replaced wind power with engines, electricity, and automatic control. But even as machines changed, the old goal remained: keep water levels within a livable range. After the climax, water management became coordination between national, regional, and local levels. The sea, major rivers, small canals, and urban rainfall cannot be handled by only one level. Each level sees one part, but water forces them to connect the parts. Modern upgrades therefore not only fix weak points, but also update risk standards. A dike line is judged not only by the present, but by the population behind it. If a dense city lies behind it, safety requirements cannot be the same as for an empty meadow. That way of thinking turns safety into a problem of probability, consequence, and recovery. Beyond prevention, the Netherlands also considers how to reduce damage if water still gets in. Escape routes, warnings, planning, and drills become a soft layer of defense behind concrete. The response after disaster therefore created not only structures, but a culture of vigilance. From here comes the biggest misunderstanding, that the Netherlands only needs to build very high dikes. That misunderstanding is appealing because dikes are easy to see, while the rest usually stays silent. But if there are only dikes, rainwater inside still needs somewhere to go. If there are only pumps, the sea outside can still push through a weak opening. If there is only technology, a wrong decision at the wrong time can still increase risk. The truth is that the Netherlands survives through a combination: dikes, polders, pumps, data, and governance. One part lies outside concrete: the agreement that water must be managed collectively. No single household can build a private wall strong enough to save an entire region. No city can be safe if the upstream river area is managed poorly, and no generation inherits safety without continuing to maintain it. So the question is not whether the Netherlands has defeated water, but how it is operating today. Water is not defeated. It is monitored, routed, and sometimes given space. This opens the modern turning point. Sometimes the best defense is to make room for water. The modern turning point does not reject dikes, but no longer sees them as the only answer. Instead of forcing rivers into narrow channels, some places widen areas where water may spread. Instead of endlessly building higher, people ask which places should stay empty and which should be raised. This is not surrendering to water, but shifting from absolute control to intelligent control. In the new way of thinking, water is treated like a dangerous guest that needs its own room. When it enters the right room at the right time, it causes far less harm. The future of the Netherlands therefore lies between high technology and very simple empty spaces. A pump can respond quickly, but an open area can reduce pressure from the beginning. A storm surge barrier can close the sea, but healthy dunes can also slow waves. A sensor can measure water level, but community memory helps residents avoid complacency. The modern lesson is not to place all trust in a single layer of protection. The future does not ask whether the Netherlands can block all water, but how quickly it can adapt. Because sea level, heavy rain, and land subsidence are not enemies standing still. So the upside-down boat must be repaired, opened by valves, and reshaped while still carrying people. Evening falls, and a long dike lies between the gray sea and glowing windows. Outside, waves still arrive. Inside, stoves still burn, trains still run, and children still go home. The Netherlands does not live below the sea by magic, but by an operating rhythm that must not be forgotten. Survival here is not defeating nature once, but learning to manage it every day.